Hi, friends. Welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Today is something a little bit different. I am thrilled to have author Kate Elliott here to talk about some of her amazing books. Kate Elliott has been writing science fiction and fantasy for 30 years with 27 books in print. Her most recent full-length novel is Unconquerable Sun, a gender-swapped Alexander the Great in space. She is best known for her Crown of Stars epic fantasy series, the Afro-Celtic post-Roman alt history fantasy with lawyer dinosaurs, which sounds fantastic. Cold Magic and YA Fantasy Court of Fives. Her particular focus is immersive world building in epic stories of adventure and transformative cultural change. She lives in Hawaii, where she paddles outrigger canoes and spoils her schnauzer. You can find her online at kateelliott.substack.com and at Kate Elliott SFF on Twitter. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I have been reading your books for quite a while. I haven't read all of them, but quite a number of them, and it's exciting. So I know the most recent thing that is, or has it officially come out yet? I know they sent it to me early. Okay, next week. Okay, so next week, The Keeper's Six is coming out, and I do also want to talk a little bit about Unconquerable Sun, but maybe we could start with The Keeper's Six because I know that's the newest thing. How would you pitch it to people if you were gonna tell people about it?
It's my first contemporary fantasy, which is kind of odd for me, because mostly I have written, I have written science fiction and fantasy, often in secondary worlds or in very, very changed alternate Earth history. But this one is set in the contemporary times, but it is, of course, a portal fantasy, which means there's a multiverse element to it. So I would kind of call it leverage. There's a leverage element to it because I really enjoyed that TV show Leverage. And I like that gang of people who each have a special skill they bring. But the key is this is a story about a really pissed off mother. And in this case, an older woman whose children are adults. But this is a pissed off mom story. A dragon boss has kidnapped her son, and she's getting her son back.
Yeah. I loved it. It was so great. And I think one thing I wanted to ask you about, because I love seeing that kind of thing, kind of a older woman or a mom character in fantasy that I've been seeing a little more recently. But we live in this world that does tend to sometimes prioritize youth, and this does center this woman who is even a young grandmother. And so what has the reception been on that? And also, what is it like writing an older female character in fantasy?
So, of course, the book, as we record this, the book isn't out yet.
Sure.
And what I found, so I don't have a lot to go on yet. What I found early on was that I realized people thought that if they said a furious mom rescuing her child, that people's assumptions immediately seemed to go to a younger mother with a small child.
Right.
And then it became that kind of child in peril thing. And so having noticed that, I asked the publicity, I asked Tor.com to say, hey, can just let people know it's an adult mom. And because that it's an adult children, because that changes the dynamic a lot.
Yeah.
So far, what I have seen in the reviews, although I kind of avoid reviews, but and yet here I am peeking, right? Because we're like that.
It's hard.
But I think people are excited to see an older woman, and especially a grandmother, especially one who isn't, kind of like a crone who sits in the corner knitting, which is all great, right? That's an important role too. But it seems like we have the young woman and the really ancient woman, but there's a kind of a whole range of middle age that women get into that is kind of becomes invisible in U.S. society, not in other societies. And I want to say here that I live in Hawaii. I'm fortunate enough to live in Hawaii, and I've lived here for 20 years. And one of the most amazing things to me about moving here was that I moved here when I was about 40. And in the US, at about 35, 40, women start becoming invisible to certain aspects of society, but not here, because Polynesia and, well, first of all, Polynesian cultures are an anti-culture. older women are aunties.
Mm,
Everyone is addressed. Older women are addressed as auntie, older men are addressed as uncle, but aunties have a powerful role here, and young people respect age. That's part also the East Asian influence, but
right.
also especially women, because I might know your auntie. So you're not going to be rude to me. It's a
Right.
smaller society, right?
Yeah.
And it's very empowering to live in a society where you're not invisible, where and the contrast is very strong. So I wanted to kind of bring that forward too, to say, hey guys, there's women, older women are doing a lot of the work, a huge amount of the work that keeps society together. Anyway, this
Yeah.
is one of my things. And then of course it
I
was
love
easy.
it. No, I love it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
great.
yeah. So it was easy for me to write because I'm older, right?
Right.
And I also wanted to write a story in which the rescue isn't effected through having, a machine gun and being violent.
Hmm.
That wouldn't work. And
Right.
so there's other ways people do things that are just as effective, more effective often.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes.
And I
I love
wanted it
it.
to be
It's
funny.
great.
I wanted it to have humor as well.
Successfully so. It was
Thank
great.
you.
I
Thank
thought
you.
it was delightful. Um, yeah, so one thing about this, and I know it's set in the same universe as Servant Mage, which came out last year, which was also great. You pack so much world building, character development, and plot into this relatively short novella. Like, right?
I know. I
It's not very
know.
long, but there's so much. I mean, which I think is amazing. But I wonder in the writing process, how do you walk the line of balancing the world building, the character development, the plot in these shorter works, and how do you make that work?
I'm still working on that. I'm known for writing really long books. The sequel to Unconquerable Sun is like unbelievably long. But I think it moves really fast, actually, because I think there's just no wasted space. It's just a lot of material, and it's a huge. I mean, it's multiple star systems worth of world building.
Yeah.
I love world building. So one of the reasons I wrote the novellas, and I have to say here up front that Servant Mage and Keeper Six aren't. They're not. They're. I would say that offhand they're not in the same universe, but maybe they could be because they both involve
Okay.
portals, right?
They
They
feel
both
like they're in
involve.
the same multiverse almost, like I don't know.
No, actually, you're onto something here because if I may make a tangent for a second, which is one reason
Of
my
course.
books are so long, is what's interesting is I wrote I had a whole bunch of story ideas, seeds coming up all at the same time. These two completed novellas are two of them, and they all involve portals. And I don't know why. It just was something. So I in the back of my mind, I kind of think of them being related. Maybe there is a link there. And
Mm,
the secret about Servant Mage, which is set in a totally secondary world, there's no connection to Earth, is that it's
right.
actually a prequel to the original story I wanted to write, which does involve a connection to Earth.
Oh, okay.
See, so
I mean,
you picked up something there, right?
because that's how it felt. So I just assumed they were connected in some
I'm going
way.
to say something which is kind of a spoiler, but which you won't understand if you haven't read the book, and you won't understand while you're reading the book until you reach that moment.
Yeah.
Remember that moment where the captain
Hmm.
says, "I have the spark floats up over the abyss," and the captain says, "I have another plan, or I have another option." It's just
Uh-huh.
that's when she realizes that there's something going on that she doesn't know about. That's it. That's the hint. That's the link
Okay.
to this second story, which I
Interesting.
hope to write, but I
Okay.
don't know. I don't,
I
you
hope
know.
so because it feels well, and that's one thing that I love about the is that in both cases, both novellas, I think have a contained story, but feel like they're really part of a larger universe or world. Like
Yeah,
it feels like a
yeah.
very lived in world. So I wonder, like, how do you approach doing that kind of world building? How much is there that's not in the book that you know?
There's always a lot, but if I put in everything I knew, they would all be
Right.
500,000 words long.
course.
So one of the reasons to go back, so one of the reasons I wrote the two novellas, and Keeper Six is technically a short novel if you go by the 40,000 word
Okay. Yeah.
rule. It's actually like 52,000 or something, is that I wanted to try to compress my normally long writing style. My natural length is probably 180 to 240,000 words. Like if I wrote a novel, that's where it would fall most easily for me. I don't say that because I'm proud of it, and I don't say that because I'm ashamed of it. It's just my sweet spot, right? It's not very cost effective, but there it is. You got to write what you got to write.
Yep.
And I wanted to try to focus and try to say, how can I do this in a shorter package? And why don't I start with a novella, and then maybe someday I can write 100,000 word novel instead of a 240,000 word novel. I don't know. So I think it was challenging for me. In the case of Servant Mage, I did it by really keeping the scope of the story very tight. You have Felion. She goes on a trip with this small group of people. And then there's a resolution that focuses just on a decision she has to make.
Right.
And then with the Keeper Six, it was the same thing. There's just it's a huge universe in the multiverse, because obviously there's endless connections.
Yeah.
But I focused it on one event. And then I tried to only reveal what I thought the reader needed to know to understand why they made the choices they did. This is why we have to do this first, and this is how we're going to travel across this place, and then this is what we're going to do. So I tried to keep it focused in that way. When I have more space in a novel, then I can kind of stretch out and expand the world a little bit more. So if I had written this as a novel, we might have gone into one of the world with the trains, or
right.
And had
there's so many things
there.
I'm like there's so much I'm curious about, and I feel like there's so much you could say. It's
there is. I mean, the whole history of the hordes, and and the whole thing with the dragons, and where did the dragons come from, and what is Kai's full backstory, and there's
a lot.
There's a lot. And then I had to but I kept it focused just on this. Esther's son has been kidnapped, and she's got to get him back. Right. And I just wanted to, so I used that. Anyway, as a writer, I'm always trying to improve. I always try to find something to work on it with each book that I think I need improvement on. So these two books were my attempt to kind of tighten things up. But they're still pretty heavy. They're still very heavy world building. And I know that there are a few readers who are like, wow, there's a lot of world building in these, but there's way less world building in these than there are in my other books.
No, it's true. I mean, I've read kind of a bit from both, so I really like that. I guess I feel like it's different from a lot of novellas, but I feel like in some ways these could be a good introduction for somebody who wants to get into fantasy with a lot of world building, but try it in a bite-sized format just to begin,
and that was another thing I was thinking of. So people were like, I want to read Kate Elliott, but this is a 7-volume epic fantasy series. That's a lot to start with. And it's like, here's Servant Mage, or here's The Keeper Six. This is 200 pages.
Yep.
And then you're done. And it's a complete story. It's resolved. And so
it's great. Can you talk a little bit about how, in whatever ways your own background might have influenced this novella? It begins in a place that I'm guessing is Hawaii. It reads like Hawaii. And so how much of, your own writing, and I mean, I guess that'd be different, your first time writing contemporary fantasy, what did that look like, putting some things from the real world into this?
So I wanted to, first of all, I want to say I don't write semi-autobiographical. I'm not a person who self-inserts myself. So sure. Esther isn't by no means meant to be like me. I'm not nearly as clever and quick-witted as Esther. I would be panicking and crying, unlike her. So I enjoyed writing someone who's so decisive and, but I wanted to do, there were two things with this book I wanted to do besides the fact that I wanted to write the older mom with adult children story and an older woman protagonist. But I wanted to show Oahu, which is the island I live on. I wanted to show Hawaii from the perspective of someone who lives here. And a lot of times when people write about Hawaii, it's written kind of to exotify it,
Mm.
you know, it's like they're letting people who are not the local scene, and there's a lot of great writing going on here in the islands. If you look at something like Bamboo Ridge Press, you can find lots of books that are written by people who live here from the perspective of people who live here. In this case, I knew this book would be read, and those books don't always get read a lot outside this market. And I knew this book would be read outside this market. And I wanted to write Oahu not in the Hawaii Five-0 sense, which is really a show marketed to people who don't live here. So the Hawaii they're showing is kind of, first of all, it's not very realistic. Sorry. But it's also, there's that exotified sense, or, hey, I'm going to play up this thing that seems different from, Kansas. I don't know. And so I wanted to write from the perspective of someone who lives here. So these are just the ordinary, everyday living here things.
Mm-hmm.
I had a funny exchange with my editor who said, "What is this word lanai?" And I said, "Well, it's a porch." "Well, can't you just call it a porch?" And I'm like, "No, because no." And so I found a way to define it in the text.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I had to juggle that. I had to show some things that I then I had to find ways to define a few things. But the setting in that sense is kind of low key. So if someone is looking for something really like bright and Hawaii Five-0-ish, this isn't it. This is just people living there.
Right.
Wait, now I forgot what the second thing I was going to say was, and it'll come back to me another time. Because that was,
right.
What's the other? This is me. Okay. There was another thing that I wanted to do with this book, but I can't remember what it is right now.
Okay. No worries.
This is the other problem with tangents. Then I have to start a whole new plot
right. It's like, what were all of the things I wanted to talk about? Yeah. No, I get it. Well, and I guess that's maybe a good jumping off point. And this, I think, is a question I have, not just for, because you mentioned that you don't do self-insert things. You do have in this and in Unconquerable Sun, which I want to talk more about, like a lot of nuanced diversity in the characters you write and kind of the relationships you portray and stuff. How do you approach writing characters with identities that might differ from your own? What does that look like for you for research and writing and approaching that?
Perfect question, because it reminded me of what the second thing was.
Okay,
so
great.
The other thing I wanted to do is that my kids joke that there's always some kind of a Jewish analog in my stories. Is we're Jewish. This was a story that, because it's contemporary, I could actually put a Jewish character with a Jewish identity and with there's a lot of little Jewish things, and it's not, again, it's the lived life that people are living in. Not me writing to say, hey, this is exotic Jewish stuff. They just live that way. So that was another thing. So in the case of Hawaii, one of the interesting things about Hawaii is that this is a true melting pot culture, which is not actually the best term anymore, but Hawaii is fascinating. The history of Hawaii is fascinating. Of course, it was originally settled by Polynesian voyagers about, 1,500 years ago. It eventually became a kingdom in about 1800 when Kamehameha the First conquered the whole thing, because he was that kind of guy. And then Westerners had come in already. You had whaling people, but as more Westerners came in, then they began to grow sugarcane and pineapple here. I don't know the exact dates, but the Native Hawaiians didn't want to. Well, first of all, many of them died from disease brought by outsiders. And of course, eventually the kingdom here was overthrown in 1893, which is a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, because outside business interests wanted to create these sugarcane and enrich themselves on agriculture, they began to bring in outside populations. First, they brought in Chinese farmers, and then the Japanese and Portuguese, Filipino, and there was a small group of Koreans early in the 20th century. So you have these waves of people coming in, and then they live in the plantation, which what are called plantations. It's has a slightly different. The term often evokes the South, right, and slavery.
Right.
It's a slightly different term here, but they would all live in these villages where the only common language they had would have been English.
Mm-hmm.
But none of them necessarily were fluent in English. The first settlers, the first ones who came over, the first immigrants. So that's how Hawaiian Pidgin developed, which is it's a Creole. It's a kind of a second. It's understandable because it's English, but it's also clearly altered. It's an altered Pidgin. Yeah. So that created this whole local culture here. And what that means is that when I'm writing a story set here, 90% of the people are not going to be default white.
Right.
That's not the world I live in. That's not the world I move through day by day. So for me, just having that, that's just an expectation. I did have to make sure I put everyone's last names down, because this also isn't a society where I can say someone was Gus, Augustus, right? Gus, his last name is Ho, Ho, which is a Chinese name, but he's Native Hawaiian, because he's Native Hawaiian and Portuguese and Chinese. And in other words, a lot of people here are very mixed. That's just normal.
Mm-hmm.
But how do I say that? In another kind of book, I would say someone, I would make sure to flag that so a reader would know that not everybody is white. But you can't do that and have it be true to the way someone who lives here would think about people. So it was complicated. As I was just referring to, at one point I make sure that they're all introduced with their last name so that people can see, so that, oh, okay, this isn't Jones and Smith, right?
Right.
And then, like Gus speaks Pidgin a little bit to Esther to show that shows that he's local. And in other terms, just having people trying to show the relationships between people, so like Daniel and Kai had put in a ramp for Uncle Joe, just trying to show that, and that there was a family compound, which would be a very typical thing here. You would have several houses on the same plot of land where you would have an extended family living. That's the kind of thing I was trying to do with it. But I'm just trying to, in the case of the contemporary, I'm just trying to write Hawaii. But I used Esther as my point of view, because I wasn't going to try to write from the point of view of a woman who is Native Hawaiian, grew up on Kauai, has lived on Oahu for her adult life. That's like, I have too many friends who have that. That was just for me, especially with contemporary fantasy. It's like, I'm not the right person to write that.
Right.
Someone else can write that. But I can show that by showing this wide range of people. It's a little different with Unconquerable Sun because it's set far in the future. And then I have a little more leeway to show this huge, diverse range of people who, are descendants of the modern world, presumably.
Well, and then you have this large cast of characters as opposed to one perspective as well, which is different. Yeah.
So I think in general, I try to do what I think I can do well, and then I do my research. I either talk to people, I read, I watch things that I think are reasonable, that are done, always from the perspective of the people who would know that perspective. And then I try not to push that. I think the biggest thing is just to be aware of my own limitations. And as long as I bring that awareness in, it's not that I won't make mistakes, because I think every writer will make mistakes about identity, but also about identity is one aspect of people's lives.
Right.
And we, as writers, we make mistakes about a lot of things. Identity is important because it's so crucial to us. So, I might ask someone to, I did have someone read to help me figure out how to use the pronouning, because I wanted the dragons. The dragons have a very complex gender, which I spent a lot of time working out, and I went through several versions of it before I settled on what I liked. And then, so I got some help trying to figure out how I wanted to deal with pronouns, because they have this extra pronoun that represents anyway.
It's very interesting. Yeah,
I know.
like
I could do a whole, I hope to be able to write. I have 1 or 2 more books that I could write in the Keeper 6 specific world. And I hope I get to, because there'll be a lot more about dragons.
I hope so too. I would love to see more. It would be a lot of fun. So I do want to talk a little bit about Unconquerable Sun. I love it. I'm so excited. We're finally getting a sequel, I think in April. Last I saw.
It was delayed. It was supposed to come out last August, and then there was some publishing delays. So it was ready to go. It's a long wait. I'm sorry. For me, it's been a long and slightly frustrating wait, but it's coming.
It's understandable. I'm excited. I'm curious what drew you to the story, writing a gender swapped Alexander the Great in space, which I've been telling everyone. I'm like, y'all need to read this book. It's so good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And the second book is a little different than the first. The first book is what I call Young Alexander, right? So it's, and there is a cousin, naturally, the people who are like, oh, this is just YA. Because if a woman wrote a book, then it's just YA. No. They wouldn't say the same if if the Sun character were male. I don't think that they would have said the same thing.
No.
If I have to say one thing about the YA thing with Unconquerable Sun, because Alexander and Philip, his father, who was an amazing king, Alexander couldn't have done what he did, which is conquer half the known world, or specifically the Persian Empire. If not for all the things his father had done, Philip, before him. And I will try not to go down the geeky history Alexander, rabbit hole. And that relationship between these two very dynamic, very ambitious, very probably who knows how nice these guys were. I don't think they were nice people. But anyway, they had a lot of conflicts when Alexander was young. And so when I gender flipped Philip into Irene, I kept those conflicts. And because one of the emotional plot lines for Sun in book 1 is Sun wants her mother to give her a word of praise, because Irene is the most dynamic person in Sun's universe, in Sun's life. This is the person who saved Chaonia, who built Chaonia into power, who created the fleets, who, did everything. And Irene is a very ambitious person who sees now she has this child who's coming of age and who is strong enough and smart enough and competent enough that there's a little competition. And this is all true of Philip and Alexander. But because it was a woman, a mom, right? If you want your mom's, there's a certain kind of reader, I think usually a male reader. If you want your mom's good opinion, then your child. That's automatically immature, right? Because they can't see it. I'm
interesting.
Yes.
That's so interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
If it had been a 21-year-old man seeking his father's approval, I wouldn't have gotten the same reaction. That would have been fine.
Yeah. That is fascinating. That's the response it got. Wow.
Yeah. Well, from some people.
Right. But still, I mean, I think that's so interesting, because that's not something that reading it didn't strike me in that way. It made sense.
Yeah.
Given that is fascinating.
Yeah. So, but I have to tell you straight up that I have 3 children, all adults. My eldest, and then twin boys, and the older of the twins is named Alexander. So you have to understand that I have had an Alexander interests from, I don't know, long before.
Okay.
I don't know why. I'm really interested in empire, maybe because the United States is an empire, and I'm interested in how there was the Roman Empire and the different Chinese empires, the Han and the Tang and the Qing Empire. So, the Persian Empire that Alexander conquered there, and I could go on and on. The process of empires expanding and why some countries develop that imperial reach and others just stay where they are and don't. I mean, anyway, and then of course, Alexander is this amazing character who, in the Victorian times, they all praised him. And then later it was like, oh, he was terrible, psychopath, so you go from the honorable Alexander to the psychopath Alexander. And
Yeah.
people have been writing stories about him for, over 2000 years. In the Middle Ages, the most popular cycle of stories, of fabulous stories told in the Middle Ages was not King Arthur and not the Nibelungenlied in Germany. It was Alexander stories. We don't know that now because they fell out of, right? Anyway, yeah. So all
That's
over,
so
in
interesting.
Ethiopia and in India and in Iran, there's all these stories, these Alexander stories from the Middle Ages. It's amazing. Anyway,
Wow.
why would you not want to do gender swapped Alexander in space? That's the question.
I mean, it's true. It's true.
So yeah, that's my long version of that's why I did. And then the other reason I wanted to do it is that, when I started reading, there just weren't that many great things for girls and women to do in science fiction fantasy, which I always gravitated to from like when I was a child.
Yeah.
And I was that kid who was always climbing trees, but the stories that I was supposed to like and the things I was supposed to want to do back in those days when these gender roles were a lot more confined, they didn't fit me. So when I started writing, I was like, well, I'm going to write girls in these adventures, right? Because I started writing as a teenager. And then I just didn't stop. I was like, well, I'm going to put women in these stories and I'm going to change these. But the one thing that I don't see so much is women who are truly these incredible, charismatic military leaders who everyone, and this is the key in Unconquerable Sun and in Furious Heaven is no one is like, well, she's pretty good for a woman. Because you see that in history. She was like a man. She ruled like a man, right? She was effective, right? But Sun never has to prove herself as a woman because nobody cares.
Right.
She's just effective. And I just wanted to write a woman in that role because I'm speaking to the modern world and the modern reader.
Yeah.
And so that's the other reason I did it.
Yeah.
It's easy to write a guy in that role, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it's great to see. And I think this is part of what is so cool about right now that some of these stories are being told and are out there to pick up. And I loved it. It was so interesting and fast paced. And yeah, I'm excited for the next one. So one thing I wonder is it is a large scale, and you mentioned this previously because there's a lot happening. There's a lot of characters. There's a large empire. Were there any challenges to writing something on that scale?
Well, yes. But remember that I wrote a 7-volume epic fantasy series. So
True.
with hundreds, if not thousands, I think there's hundreds of characters, of named characters, and a huge plot that spans all of Europe and even a little bit in North Africa at one point, which isn't called Africa, but anyway, it's an alternate Earth. So I've done this before. I've been in this room before. And the advantage of the Alexander story is that I had that as a template to divide up. So I knew how I was going to divide it up. There was going to be the first story, which I call Young Alexander, the Alexander proving himself as a young man, in this case, Sun proving herself as a young heir. And then there's the second Furious Heaven, which is coming, which I'm not going to say any more about, and it's its own thing. And then there's the third book, which I'm working on now, which is a little so each one is tonally a little different, and that reflects also the historical career. But the easy, I'm not going to say easy part. The easy part was also the hard part. So because I had that template, I could say, okay, the plot pretty much clicks along. I'm going to change the analogs. Like instead of the Battle of Gaugamela, I'll have this will kind of stand in for that, right? So, but I need this battle. I need a battle here of some kind, and this works well enough. But there are a lot of people in the actual history, and when you read history, you don't expect to get to know those people as characters,
Right.
And we approach history with a different mindset. But if I'm writing a novel, I can't have all the people that are actually in the history. So I have to who's the most important people to make my story work? Who do I have to have? Well, I have to have the Alexander analog. I have to have Sun. I have to have the Ephesian analog. So I have to have Hetty, because that matters to me to have that relationship in there. I have to have the Philip analog on the Olympias analog, his parents who are gender flipped into Irene and Joa, right? And then beyond that, who do I need? Who makes the story go? But who do I have to let go of? Or who can I combine? I can combine the things that these three minor people who really lived did and put them into one story. And part of that is and then I have to decide what approach I'm going to take and what I want to emphasize. And book 2 is long, and it's huge. It's like the most massive scope. But I think it reads really fast, but you see a lot of stuff going on. So the hard part was finding the narrative spine to hook it together, because I knew all the plot things that happened and I know all the character things that happened. But there's a pacing thing in books where you're like, I need to find out what happened in the next chapter, because it's almost an intangible thing that makes you want to turn that page. Not just, I opened the door and there was a man pointing a gun at me. That's one way to do it. But I don't know. I don't understand writing well enough yet to be able to articulate it. So that was the hard part. The hard part was also the easy part, that I had this to work with, but I had to trim it back. History is too complex and too weird to be fiction.
Right. Yeah. So with that, for this or any books, what does your research process look like? And maybe is there something interesting you discovered along the way that maybe didn't go? Yeah, the books.
Let me see. Those are my 2 Alexander shelves there.
Wow. Okay.
And then there's
Yeah.
Roman. First of all, I'm a history geek. I love history. Wow. There's so many amazing things. I would say one of the most interesting things I discovered, and this would have been a few years ago now when I first really started diving into this. So we think about this story. We think about the ancient Greeks and the Macedonians who, were north of Greece and weren't strictly Greeks. As this culture where the women, we think of it through the Athenian lens, where the women were, didn't get out much and they were secluded in their homes and they didn't do anything. That's kind of this idea of Greek women, But in fact, on the margins of, greater Greece, you had like the Illyrians and the Thracians, and these women were often trained to fight. And I mean, literally, they trained as warriors. So Philip's first wife was an Illyrian princess. So Illyria would probably be what Bulgaria is now. Someone's going to tell me I'm wrong. And I don't have a map in front of me. His first wife was a trained warrior who died in battle. And the daughter she had with Philip, she only had one because it was not a love. Philip married like 8 women, and he didn't make love matches. He made political alliances. Okay. The daughter she had with Philip, Kainane, she was trained by her mother as a warrior, and she also died in battle.
Wow.
After the death of Alexander, when they were competing over who was going to rule, right? Did you know that?
No.
Right? When I found that out and I thought, wait, why do we never see this?
Yeah.
Why is this just ignored in the history? Yeah. All of a sudden, your kind of mind just, the Amazons aren't just some myth, right? That the Greeks made up to talk about whatever the people talk about. These are real people who really lived.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Just bring back more of that. I love that there is more of a focus lately on, and I'm seeing it in other genres too, of like rediscovering parts of history that have been left out because of who was telling it. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm seeing a
Um,
real flood of stories. Let's tell the undiscovered or ignored or erased stories of women, what women were doing. Because there's a flip
mhm.
side to this that I always want to point out, which is that women's stories aren't important. Like I'm focusing here on Sun, who's the
Right.
military leader, right? But like with my Crossroads trilogy, which starts with Spirit Gate, the main female character, and she's kind of the main, this is another like Cast of Thousands trilogy, set in a completely secondary world. But the main female character there, I think the only thing she ever uses a knife for is cooking, chopping up vegetables. She's very much a woman. Her name is Mai. And she, in some ways, she is my favorite character I've ever written. And I don't say that
Mm.
lightly because I love all my characters. But I deliberately wrote her to not be an athlete, to not be kick-ass, to not be a warrior or secretly an assassin. She lives a traditional of that era. Well, who even knows what traditional is, right? Now that we find about Kainane and her warrior woman
Yeah.
tradition. But anyway, she lives what we think of as a traditional woman's life. And the story is about people from another place who, as refugees, have to come and make a place for themselves in a new land. And her skills become crucial to affecting that ability of these people to come in and make a new life there. These traditional, what I would call womanly or feminine skills, because that story also matters. It's
Yeah.
not just women who can do men things are important. No, women who can do things that traditionally were seen as women's work. That's also important, and that's also narratively worthy.
Yep. Yeah. I love
Yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're seeing
Um,
that. Yeah, we're seeing that a lot.
yes, we're seeing
More
that,
of
which
that.
I think is amazing.
Yeah.
Which I think dovetails nicely, I guess, with the question of what kinds of stories are you interested in telling, and has that changed through the course of your career? Because you've been doing this for a long time.
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I mean, a longtime reader of mine, Finn, that's my dog. Finn, come here, buddy. No barking. We'll see how this works. Come here. Oh, well, a longtime reader of mine put together one of those, those bingo cards, and it was like Kate
Mhm.
Elliott bingo, right?
Oh,
So the brilliance, yes, it's
that's
really
great.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so usually it has free space in the middle,
Uh-huh.
right? So that you can always have it instead of free space, she has women, which I find really. So in that sense, I haven't changed at all, but it
Mhm.
is true. So like when I just talked about the character of Mai, when I reached that trilogy, when I was going to write that trilogy, I realized that I had been deferring. Well, I did this with the Geron books too, which I wrote before the big epic fantasy. I realized that I had gotten caught in that idea of I can write women if they're doing man things. And then I thought, wait a minute, isn't that sexist too? Aren't I just being sexist like men are if I'm not highlighting things that women traditionally did or showing women's roles in camp? So
Yeah.
that's been something that over time I've consistently tried to keep aware of my own biases, which it's hard to get away from. In Court of Fives, which is the YA fantasy, the main character is an athlete and a really competitive person. And yet, periodically, my editor would say, she's just letting these things happen to her. Can't she be more proactive within the constraints she has? And I realized that a part of me, so I wrote that, 20, 25 years into my writing career, I was still letting things happen to women, even,
Hmm.
even a character who was supposed to be competitive.
Hmm.
So it's like you spend your whole life excavating these things. The other thing that I think is visible in The Keeper Six is that I really like to write about war and empire, but in The Keeper Six, and to some extent in Servant Mage as well, I'm getting more interested in writing stories in which violence isn't what solves the problem.
Mm.
Because I think we need that. And there's lots of people who have been doing that, especially these days. But for me, it's important for me to start to explore those things as well.
Yeah.
since I tend to default back there. So I would say those are the big ones.
That's great. So I know we don't have a lot of time left. I do have a few questions that were submitted by some of my patrons that
Oh,
they
okay.
had.
Okay,
So I
I'm ready.
said, all right. So Dr. Jade wants to know, what comes first for you, the plot or the characters?
The setting.
The setting. Okay.
And actually I can give a very clear answer to this. What comes first to me is a vision in my mind of a character in a setting. And those two things go together, and then the plot comes out of that.
Okay.
I have to know where am I and who's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, I'm gonna like hop around because like people had multiple questions. So I'm like, I'll hop around so everybody gets
Okay.
something
Okay.
and we'll see what we can get to. Kristen asked, and you know, maybe we've spoken to this a little bit, but what has changed about your process or your writing from when you started to now?
I'm a
Has your
better, this is a great question. When I started, I loved first drafting, and revision was really hard for me and I dreaded it. Now I dread first drafting because the editor sitting over my shoulder is like, this is bad. This is bad. Oh my God, really? But I love revising. So it's like, I like force myself to get to the end of that first draft, because then I can revise, and I can revise 5 times. I can do, I think that's the biggest thing. I've learned how to revise.
which is important. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Beth asked, what was your favorite of your books to write?
Boy, that's a
That's a hard
so
one.
I don't, this is a tough one.
Mhm.
I don't really, I don't know that I had a favorite book to write, in the sense of any book that I wrote when I was just really into it while I was writing it. That was one of my favorite books. So I would say like, okay, there's 4 Geron books. The first one went through like 8 drafts before it was finally published, over like 10 years, because it took me
Wow.
that long to learn how to do it right. The 4th book was really hard to write because that's a long story, which I won't go into. But the middle book, which was published in 2 parts, but is really one book, that one was pretty easy to write because I knew what I needed to do. I knew what everything. And so I wrote like, it must have been like, I don't know. I wrote like a lot of words, like 250 to 300,000 words in like 9 months. And then it was published as 2 books because I knew it. So that was easy. The Cold Magic books were pretty easy to write, especially books 2 and 3, because the narrator, it's first person, and she's so funny.
Yeah.
That Cat Barrow Hollow, she's so funny she's just fun to write. I would say the Wily Persephone chapters in the Unconquerable Sun books are easy to write because she's very easy to write for reasons that you will understand if you've read them. And then I just wrote a book this past summer. I needed to do like a palate cleanser, and it was like a grand piano dropped out of the sky and hit my head. And I wrote a standalone romantic fantasy novel in a brand new universe, a secondary universe. In 6 months, it was like this long book. And I just wrote it, and it was just like, yeah, now this is going to happen. Oh yeah. I say, yeah. That was great.
Are we getting that book?
I hope so. It's out on submission.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I wrote it it's out on submission. So let's hope it's,
I'm like, listen, romantic fantasy. It sounds great. I'll read it.
I just enjoyed the process so much. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed writing a first draft that much.
That's great. Okay, so I'll go back. I'm gonna loop back around because everybody was like, we have lots of questions. So we'll see. If I don't know if you see them or read them, but if so, how do you process and deal with negative book reviews?
I try to avoid them. And there's a 2-part thing. There's sometimes people will say something negative that I just find really funny, because either it means they don't know something, like the guy who complained that in the Crown of Stars books are set in the equivalent of early medieval Europe. And someone said, well, she clearly didn't do her research because she has these big battles between kingdoms where there's only 1,000 people on each side. And, you know, the Roman legions had 10,000 or 20,000 people. And I'm like, well, he didn't do his research on early medieval Europe, did he? Because I'm right and he's wrong. Those don't bother me. But I have to be careful because other kinds of reviews can kind of get just that make me feel bad about myself. Oh no, I'm never going to be any good. No one's ever going to like my books. And there's no point. You know what? Readers get to like what they like and they get to dislike what they dislike. I do the same. So for me, I've learned to avoid.
That's probably for the best.
Let readers,
there's going to be people who are going to love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Reviews are for readers.
Yeah. That's great. Have changes in the industry or what's popular made you change how you approach your storytelling?
I do work a lot on pacing. So again, Crown of Stars, which was published from 1997 to 2006, is a slower paced, rather more densely written. It's heavy on the world building. It's very emotional. A lot of deep character work. But I don't think it could get published now because it's slow. And I really think now, I really work hard about pacing now. Keep it moving. I do try to lighten up the world building a little bit, but in reality, I don't really read things that are super light world building with rare exceptions because they just don't interest me. So I've just accepted that world building is a big deal for me. But yeah, pacing.
That makes sense. Cause I mean, it's like, we're not getting like the Wheel of Time books are not coming out now. That's like a different, it has changed. That makes sense. That's interesting. Okay. Are there any fantasy authors you do like to read?
Oh, so many, too many to, so I'm going to leave people out and I apologize in advance. I love Martha Wells. I know people, I love the Murderbot books, and they are not my favorite things by her. I like her Raksura series, which starts with the Cloud Roads.
I've been meaning to read them.
Oh, I love them.
Great.
And
I love her. Are getting picked up. I just saw an announcement. Tor bought some of her older books, and they're going to be releasing them.
And I hope they're going to do the Fall of Ilren trilogy, which has one of my 5 favorite ships in all of science fiction fantasy literature. Oh my God, I love those two. It's a fantasy. She does really well with this kind of science fantasy balance. Nora Jemison's books are great. Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty, which is this massive 4-volume, incredibly complex, deeply world-built series that I just adore. I could go on, but I read I love science fiction fantasy. So
I do too. That's great. I love that. Okay, so we'll do one more. And not all authors want to answer this question, but if you want to, if The Keeper 6 was made into a movie, who might you cast to play some of the main characters?
Oh, this is easy. Rachel Weisz.
Okay. Oh, that's perfect.
Right?
Yes.
She would be Esther.
Would
she not be the perfect Esther?
She would be the perfect Esther. Yes. I love that.
Mean,
yes.
To me, that's like, I even wrote to my agent, wouldn't Rachel Weisz be perfect?
She really would.
Yeah.
I love it.
We can do it. Let's do a couple more.
Yeah. Though I think that's like most of what I've got. Okay. But what about Sun? Is that hard? That's hard.
There's a lot of people who could do that. I haven't, any young 20s strong, someone who can present that strong. She's got a Asian background, ancestry. So, but I don't have, the Esther Rachel Weisz thing was, like Cold Magic, she's too old now, but when Cold Magic came out, I was like, Zendaya could do Cat.
Okay.
She would have been perfect. She could have done Cat, right?
Yeah.
But I don't quite have that for Sun. The Sun
Mhm.
Sun is like would be a massive casting thing anyway,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because there's so you
Yeah.
have to get all the characters have to be just the right because it's really
Yeah,
even though
because it's
it's
the
about her.
relationships. It's like,
Yes.
yeah,
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 the
yeah,
Sun thing is sure it's about her, but
yeah,
it's really an ensemble cast
yeah.
story. Yeah.
Which is one thing that I love about it too, because it's so fast paced and has so much action, and yet you get these like interesting characters and relationships that are really important to the story, which you don't always get both of those together. So I love that it does both of those things so
Yeah.
well.
And
Yeah.
that's very much part of actually Alexander's story because you can't take him away from this circle that he was in
Right.
because people didn't live as solo people. People
Hmm.
lived in the community they lived in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
it. Oh, it's
And that's
amazing.
actually one of my big things is this story about community. Keeper 6 has that too. These are
Hmm.
stories about community and that's part of
Yeah.
actually the theme of Keeper 6
Yeah.
also.
Okay. I'll ask one more thing that just I'm
Okay.
wondering, just because reading Keeper Six, is Esther's name intentional
Yes.
given? Okay.
Yes. Esther
Okay.
means it's actually from Astarte, but it means star.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a guiding light. And in fact, even um, Shaheen calls her Evening Star,
Mhm.
right? Or I think Zosphodel calls her Evening Star. And that's, yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I loved it. Everybody should go and
thank
read
you.
it.
Thank you.
Buy all of them, and they're fantastic. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Well,
Um,
Bethany, thank you for these fantastic questions.
yeah. No, I appreciate it, and it's been so fun to get to talk, and hopefully people enjoy it and go read all of
I
the
hope
books
so.
and
I hope
yeah.
so.
So they should. They're great. So thank you. Thanks everybody. Go check it all out. I will have the books linked down below if you want to go and read them. And I will be back with more videos soon. Thanks.